The gunshot echoed across the rolling plains of Wyoming Territory, 1876, as Sarah Porter's world collapsed around her. Her mother's funeral had barely concluded when her brother Matthew seized control of the family ranch and everything in it, including her. Blood trickled down her temple as she regained consciousness in the pitch-black cellar beneath their home, the place that had once stored winter preserves now serving as her prison. "You're awake," Matthew's voice cut through the darkness. "Good. I need you to understand something, sister dear. With mother gone, this ranch is mine. You were to marry Edward Wilson and secure our water rights, but I hear you've been refusing him." Sarah pushed herself up against the cold dirt wall. "Edward is a cruel man. Mother would never have forced this match." "Mother isn't here," Matthew hissed, his face illuminated by the lantern he carried. At 29, he'd grown harder since returning from the war, his eyes containing none of the kindness she remembered from childhood. "You'll agree to the marriage, or you'll stay down here until you do. The choice is simple." The cellar door slammed shut, plunging her back into darkness. Sarah felt her way along the earthen walls, searching for anything that might help her escape. At 21, she'd grown up on this land, learning every inch of it alongside her father before his death 3 years ago. The ranch had been her mother's then, not Matthew's, despite what he claimed. She found nothing but a small water bucket and a threadbare blanket. Time passed in darkness, marked only by the twice-daily appearances of Matthew with meager portions of food. Sometimes he spoke of Edward's growing impatience, other times of the debts he was accumulating in town. Sarah understood the truth behind his desperation, gambling debts that he hoped to erase by selling her to Edward along with the valuable water rights she'd inherited directly from their father. 5 days into her imprisonment, Sarah heard unfamiliar footsteps above. Matthew had mentioned hiring new ranch hands, but these steps were different, more deliberate, more cautious. She gathered her strength and pounded on the cellar door. "Help, please, someone help me." The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Sarah held her breath, praying that whoever stood above could hear her through the floorboards. For several agonizing moments, silence reigned. Then the sound of furniture being moved, followed by the creak of the cellar door latch. Light flooded the stairwell, and Sarah shielded her eyes against the sudden brightness. A tall silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, hat in hand. "Madam, is someone down there?" The voice was deep, tinged with a Texas drawl. "Please," Sarah called, her voice hoarse from days of disuse. "My brother locked me down here. Help me." The figure descended the stairs quickly, revealing a man in his late 20s with sun-weathered skin and piercing blue eyes. A star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. "James Quinn," he introduced himself, kneeling beside her. "Deputy Marshal. Your brother hired me as a hand, but I'm investigating cattle rustling in these parts." His eyes narrowed as he took in her condition, the bruise on her temple, the dirt-streaked dress, the pallor of her skin. "Who did this to you?" "Matthew Porter, my brother." Sarah's voice shook. "Our mother died last week, and he's trying to force me to marry a man I despise. He wants control of my water rights." James's jaw tightened as he helped her to her feet. "Not while I'm alive, he won't." Sarah leaned against him as they climbed the stairs, her legs weak from days of confinement. The house was quiet. Matthew had ridden to town that morning, promising to return with Edward in tow. "We need to get you somewhere safe," James said, guiding her to a chair in the kitchen. He poured her a cup of water, which she drank gratefully. "Your brother will be back soon, I reckon." Sarah nodded, the cup trembling in her hands. "He went to fetch Edward Wilson. They'll return by nightfall." "Wilson." James's expression darkened. "The cattle baron from over Sweetwater Way. You know him." "Know of him. He's suspected of rustling cattle and worse. Been trying to build an empire by swallowing up smaller ranches." James ran a hand through his dark hair. "Makes sense he'd want your water rights." Sarah set down the cup. "I need to gather some things, then we can leave." James nodded, keeping watch by the window as Sarah hurried to her room. She changed quickly into a fresh dress, then retrieved a small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring and the deed to her water rights from beneath a loose floorboard. The last item she took was her father's pistol, loading it with steady hands before tucking it into her pocket. When she returned to the kitchen, James was saddling a horse outside. She joined him, pausing to look back at the only home she'd ever known. "We can't take the main road," she said. "Matthew will be coming that way with Edward." James helped her mount before swinging into his own saddle. "I know a place we can go. Old Trapper's cabin about 15 miles north. Nobody's used it in years." They rode hard, keeping to the cover of the cottonwoods along the creek bed. Sarah felt strength returning to her limbs with each mile they put between themselves and the ranch. The sun was beginning to set when they reached the cabin, a small structure nestled in a stand of pines. "It's not much," James said as he dismounted, "but it's defensible, good sight lines." The cabin was dusty but sound, with a stone fireplace and a single room containing a rough-hewn table and bed frame. James built a fire while Sarah swept years of dust from the floor. "You're not really a ranch hand, are you?" she asked as they shared a simple meal of jerky and coffee. James smiled slightly. "No, madam. Like I said, I'm tracking rustlers. Been after Wilson for months, but he's careful, never leaves evidence." He studied her across the fire. "Your brother may have done me a favor by leading me straight to him." "Matthew wasn't always like this," Sarah said softly. "He came back from the war changed, started gambling, drinking. When Father died, he expected to inherit everything, but Father left the water rights to me." "And your mother supported you," Sarah nodded. "She stood by Father's wishes. Matthew seemed to accept it until she fell ill. Then he started bringing Edward around, pushing for the marriage." James added wood to the fire. "Get some rest, Miss Porter. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next steps." Sarah took the bed while James settled in a chair by the door, rifle across his knees. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Matthew's face twisted with rage or felt the suffocating darkness of the cellar. Dawn broke with the sound of birdsong. Sarah opened her eyes to find James cooking breakfast, the aroma of coffee filling the cabin. "You know how to cook?" she asked, sitting up. He smiled, the expression warming his serious face. "A man riding alone learns to fend for himself or starve." He handed her a tin plate of beans and biscuits. "Hope it's edible." The food was surprisingly good, and Sarah found herself watching James as they ate. There was something solid about him, reliable in a way that had become foreign to her. His hands were calloused from work, but gentle when they'd helped her from the cellar. "Tell me about yourself, Deputy," she said. "What brings a Texas lawman to Wyoming?" James set down his coffee cup. "I grew up on a small spread near Austin, joined the Rangers after the war, then took a Deputy Marshal badge when they were expanding into the territories." He hesitated. "Lost my family's ranch to men like Wilson, men who take what they want because they can." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but it's why I do this work." He met her eyes. "Now we need a plan. Your brother will be searching for you, and he'll have Wilson's men helping him." "I can't hide forever," Sarah said. "The ranch is my home, my legacy, and it should be yours," James agreed. "But we need evidence against Wilson first, something that will stick in court." He considered for a moment. "Does your brother keep records, letters, business dealings?" Sarah thought about Matthew's study, the locked drawer in his desk. "He might. He's been keeping ledgers that he doesn't want anyone to see." "That could be our answer." James stood, buckling on his gun belt. "We need those ledgers." "You want to go back?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "Not immediately. First, we need to get word to the marshal's office in Laramie. I have a friend there, Marshal Davis. He can bring reinforcements." James checked his ammunition. "There's a trading post about 10 miles east. We can send a wire from there." They set out after breakfast, riding cautiously through the pine forest before emerging onto the open prairie. The trading post came into view by mid-morning, a cluster of log buildings serving as store, post office, and telegraph office all in one. James dismounted first, helping Sarah down. "Stay close," he murmured, scanning the handful of horses hitched outside. The trading post was busy with travelers and locals alike. James kept Sarah beside him as they made their way to the telegraph operator, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Need to send a wire to Marshal Davis in Laramie," James said quietly, sliding a paper across the counter. The operator nodded, reading the message James had written. "That'll be 50 cents. As James reached for his money, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Across the room, standing at the counter examining ammunition, was one of Edward Wilson's ranch hands. She recognized the distinctive brand on his vest, the Circle W. "James," she whispered, touching his arm. "Wilson's man." James glanced over casually, then back to the operator. "Send it urgent," he said, placing $1 on the counter. To Sarah, he murmured, "Don't look at him, act natural." They turned to leave, James placing a protective hand at the small of her back. They had almost reached the door when a voice called out, "Miss Porter, Sarah Porter." Sarah tensed, but James kept them moving. "Keep walking," he said under his breath. "Get to the horses." They stepped outside into the bright sunlight, moving quickly toward their mounts. Behind them, the ranch hand emerged from the trading post. "Miss Porter, your brother's looking for you." James helped Sarah into her saddle before mounting his own horse. The ranch hand hurried toward them, hand moving to his pistol. "Ride," James commanded, and they spurred their horses forward, galloping away from the trading post. The sound of hoofbeats behind them confirmed they were being pursued. James led them off the trail, cutting across open country toward a ridge of rocky outcroppings. "We need to lose him," James called over the thunder of their horses' hooves. They reached the rocks, and James guided them through a narrow passage barely wide enough for their horses. The path twisted between towering formations, finally opening into a small box canyon with steep walls on 3 sides. "Dismount," James said, helping Sarah from her horse. "Stay here with the animals, I'll handle this." Before she could protest, he was scaling the rocky wall of the canyon, positioning himself above the entrance. Sarah drew her father's pistol, positioning herself behind a boulder near the horses. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then came the sound of approaching hoofbeats, slowing as they neared the canyon entrance. Sarah held her breath, finger on the trigger of her pistol. The ranch hand appeared at the mouth of the canyon, gun drawn as he scanned the area. From above, James dropped onto him, knocking him from his horse in a cloud of dust. The two men grappled briefly before James subdued him, pressing his face into the dirt with a knee on his back. "Who sent you?" James demanded, twisting the man's arm. "Wilson." "He's offering $500 for the Porter girl," the man gasped. "Her brother's offering another 500. James pulled rope from his saddlebag, binding the man's hands behind his back. "How many men are looking for her? Dozen or more?" Searching everywhere between here and the Porter ranch, James gagged the man with a bandana, then secured him to a boulder. "He'll be found eventually, but this buys us time," he told Sarah. "We need to move quickly. By nightfall, Wilson will know we're in the area." They rode hard for hours, avoiding trails and keeping to the shelter of ravines and tree lines. The sun was beginning to set when they came within sight of Sarah's ranch, the buildings dark against the golden light. James signaled for her to stop, studying the property through field glasses. "2 riders at the front," he reported, "probably more inside." "There's another way in," Sarah said, "a tunnel from the creek bed to the root cellar. My father built it during the Indian troubles years ago." James looked at her with newfound respect. "Lead the way." They left their horses concealed in a stand of cottonwoods near the creek, approaching the house on foot as darkness fell. Sarah led James to a tangle of brush hiding the tunnel entrance. "It hasn't been used in years," she whispered as they cleared away the concealing branches. "But it should still be passable." The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to crawl in places. Earth crumbled from the ceiling, and James sheltered Sarah with his body more than once when it seemed the passage might collapse. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a wooden door. "This opens into the root cellar," Sarah explained. "There's a ladder that leads up to the kitchen pantry." James drew his pistol, I'll go first, stay behind me. The root cellar was dark and cool, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. James climbed the ladder silently, listening at the pantry door before easing it open. The kitchen beyond was empty, but voices drifted from the front of the house. Can't have gotten far. The girl's lived here all her life. She'll come back. Matthew's voice slurred with drink. She better, replied a deeper voice, Edward Wilson. I've invested too much in this arrangement to walk away empty-handed. James motioned for Sarah to follow him across the kitchen to Matthew's study. The door was unlocked, and they slipped inside. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the desk. The locked drawer, Sarah whispered, pointing. James examined it briefly before removing a thin metal tool from his pocket. With practiced movements, he picked the lock, easing the drawer open. Inside were several ledgers and a stack of letters. Sarah held a lantern while James quickly scanned the documents. "This is it," he said, his voice tight with suppressed excitement. Records of cattle stolen from ranches across 3 territories. Receipts for sales to buyers in Colorado, names of accomplices. He looked up at Sarah. "Your brother's been working with Wilson for months. They've been rustling cattle, then using the profits to buy out struggling ranchers." Sarah's heart sank. She'd known Matthew had changed, but this level of criminality shocked her. "Can you arrest them now? With this evidence, yes, but we need to get out of here first and meet Marshal Davis." James gathered the ledgers and letters. The study door burst open, flooding the room with lamplight. Matthew stood in the doorway, a shotgun leveled at them. "I thought I heard rats in the walls," he snarled. "Should have known you'd come back, Sarah. Always were too stubborn for your own good." His bloodshot eyes shifted to James. "And you, the new hand, should have known something wasn't right about you." "Put down the shotgun, Porter," James said calmly, positioning himself in front of Sarah. "It's over. We have the ledgers, the evidence of your rustling operation with Wilson." Matthew laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Evidence that'll never leave this room." He gestured with the shotgun. "Move away from my sister." James didn't budge. "Not while I'm alive." Sarah saw her brother's finger tighten on the trigger. Without thinking, she drew her father's pistol from her pocket and fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space. Matthew staggered backward, the shotgun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he collapsed. Shouts erupted from the front of the house. James grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her toward the pantry. "We need to go." Now, they raced through the kitchen as heavy footsteps approached, back down the ladder through the root cellar into the tunnel. Behind them, voices called out in confusion and anger. They emerged by the creek to find their horses undisturbed. Mounting quickly, they rode into the night, pushing the animals hard until they reached the cabin shortly before dawn. "Did I kill him?" Sarah asked as they dismounted, her voice hollow. James checked her father's pistol, noting where the bullet had struck Matthew in the shoulder. "The wound wasn't fatal, but they'll be after us with everything they have now." Inside the cabin, James secured the door and windows while Sarah built a fire. They were both exhausted, but sleep was impossible with Wilson's men potentially on their trail. "Marshal Davis should receive my telegram today," James said, placing the stolen ledgers on the table. "With luck, he'll arrive by tomorrow with enough men to arrest Wilson and your brother." Sarah stared into the fire, the reality of what had happened, what she'd done sinking in. "I shot my own brother." James sat beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "You saved my life, and your brother made his choices, Sarah. None of this is your fault." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "When did you know about Matthew and Wilson?" "I suspected something when I arrived at your ranch. Your brother was too eager to hire a stranger, asked too few questions." James sighed. "I've been tracking Wilson's operation for months. Small ranchers being forced out, cattle disappearing, the evidence was pointing this way. And then you found me in the cellar. Finding you wasn't part of the plan," he admitted with a small smile, "but I'm glad I did." The intensity in his blue eyes made Sarah's heart beat faster. She realized how close they were sitting, how warm his hands felt around hers. In the 5 days they'd been together, James Quinn had shown more concern for her welfare than any man she'd ever known. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for believing me, Sarah." He said her name softly, releasing one hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gentle touch sent warmth spreading through her. A gunshot shattered the window, sending glass flying across the cabin. James shoved Sarah to the floor, covering her with his body as more shots tore through the walls. "Wilson's men," he hissed, reaching for his rifle. "They must have followed our trail." Sarah crawled to the window, peering carefully over the sill. In the pale dawn light, she counted at least 8 riders surrounding the cabin. "Sarah Porter," Edward Wilson's voice boomed across the clearing. "Come out now and perhaps we'll let your friend live." James positioned himself at another window. "Stay down," he ordered. "When I start firing, move to the back wall. There's less exposure there." "We can't shoot our way out of this," Sarah said, her mind racing. "There are too many of them. We just need to hold them off until Davis arrives." James sighted along his rifle barrel. "Ready." He fired, and immediately the air filled with the thunder of returning gunfire. Sarah scrambled to the back of the cabin, pressing herself against the wall as bullets splintered the logs around them. James fired methodically, making each shot count. 2 of Wilson's men fell, but the others kept up a steady barrage, pinning them down. "They're working their way around to the back," James called, reloading quickly. "We need to create a diversion." Sarah's eyes fell on the fireplace, an idea forming. "The chimney," she said. "We can send up a smoke signal. There's a Shoshone settlement not far from here. They trade with my family sometimes." James nodded grimly. "Do it. I'll keep them occupied." Sarah grabbed blankets from the bed, soaking them in water before throwing them on the fire. Thick smoke billowed up, causing her to cough as she added green pine branches from the woodpile. Soon, dense white smoke was pouring from the chimney in great clouds. Outside, the firing paused briefly as Wilson's men noticed the smoke. James used the opportunity to pick off another rider who had ventured too close. "They're pulling back," he reported, keeping his rifle trained on the tree line. "Regrouping." Sarah joined him at the window, her father's pistol ready. "That won't last long. Wilson isn't the type to give up easily." "Neither am I," James said, his shoulder pressed against hers. "And neither are you, from what I've seen." Despite the danger, Sarah felt a smile tug at her lips. "My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Stubborn can keep you alive out here." James's eyes met hers briefly before returning to the threat outside. "It's one of the things I admire about you." Before Sarah could respond, a voice called from outside again, not Wilson this time, but Matthew. "Sarah, listen to me." Her brother's voice was strained with pain. "You've got nowhere to go. Wilson has men posted on every trail out of these mountains." James tensed beside her. "Don't listen to him. He's desperate." "I know," Sarah replied, "but he's also right. We're trapped unless help arrives." The standoff continued as the sun climbed higher. Wilson's men made several attempts to rush the cabin, but James's accurate fire drove them back each time. By midday, the heat inside the cabin was stifling, and their water was running low. "Something's happening," James said suddenly, peering through his field glasses. "They're pulling back to the trees." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. "Maybe they're giving up." "No." There, James broke off as a flaming arrow arced through the air, landing on the cabin's shake roof with a dull thud. More arrows followed, their pitch-soaked heads burning brightly against the blue sky. "They're trying to burn us out," Sarah gasped, grabbing the water bucket. James caught her arm. "No, save the water, we may need it." The dry wood of the roof caught quickly, flames spreading across the surface. Smoke began to filter through the ceiling, filling the cabin with acrid fumes. "We need to make a run for it," James said, gathering the ledgers. "The horses are still tied at the back. If we move quickly while they're watching the fire, we might break through." Sarah nodded, coughing as she tied a bandana over her nose and mouth. They crouched by the back door, waiting for James's signal. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes intense above his own bandana. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, keep riding east." There's a marshal's outpost 20 miles from here. I'm not leaving you, Sarah said firmly. James touched her cheek briefly. Together, then. On three. Before he could count, a new sound rose above the crackling flames' hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast from the east. James risked a glance out the window. It's Davis, he exclaimed. And he's brought plenty of men. The scene outside transformed in moments. Marshal Davis and a dozen deputies rode into the clearing, rifles raised. Wilson's men, caught by surprise, were quickly surrounded and disarmed. James and Sarah burst from the burning cabin, coughing but unharmed, the precious ledgers clutched to James's chest. "Quinn," Davis called, dismounting to greet them. "Got your telegram yesterday. Rode all night to get here." "Perfect timing," James replied, handing over the ledgers. "Everything you need to convict Wilson and Porter is in here. Names, dates, amounts, buyers." Davis flipped through the pages, whistling low. "This is bigger than we thought, goes all the way to Denver." While deputies secured the prisoners, including a sullen Edward Wilson and a pale, bandaged Matthew, James led Sarah to a quiet spot beneath the pines. "It's over," he said softly. "Your brother and Wilson will face justice. The ranch is yours again." Sarah looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. "And what about you? Will you move on to the next case?" James took her hands in his expression serious. "I was thinking I might stay around these parts. Wyoming Territory could use more lawmen." He hesitated. "And there's this woman I know, bravest woman I've ever met. I thought maybe she might let me call on her properly." Sarah's heart swelled. This woman, would she have to be particularly stubborn to catch your interest? "Particularly stubborn," he agreed, smiling now. "The kind who shoots her own brother to save a man she barely knows." "I think she'd like that very much," Sarah whispered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips gently to his. James's arms wrapped around her, drawing her close as he deepened the kiss. Around them, the deputies pretended not to notice, busying themselves with the prisoners. When they finally parted, James kept hold of her hand. "I should warn you, a lawman's life isn't easy." "Neither is a rancher's," Sarah replied, "but I think together we might manage just fine." 1 year later, Sarah stood on the porch of the rebuilt Porter Ranch house, watching James ride in from his rounds as the newly appointed marshal of the county. The water rights that had caused so much trouble were now being shared fairly with neighboring ranchers through irrigation projects James had helped organize. Matthew was serving time in the territorial prison, his testimony against Wilson and the Denver buyers having earned him a reduced sentence. Edward Wilson had not been so fortunate, receiving 20 years for his crimes. James dismounted, hanging his hat on the porch post before sweeping Sarah into his arms for a kiss that still made her heart race. "How are the new calves doing?" he asked, his arms lingering around her waist. "Growing stronger every day," she replied, "like everything else around here." He followed her gaze to the thriving ranch, the fields green with spring growth, the rebuilt barn larger than before. "Your father would be proud of what you've built." "What we've built," Sarah corrected him, taking his hand and placing it over her stomach. "And what we're still building." James's eyes widened, then filled with such tenderness that Sarah felt tears spring to her own. "A baby," he whispered. She nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in celebration. From the dark cellar of her imprisonment to the warmth of James's arms, Sarah Porter Quinn had found not just freedom, but a love that promised to grow as boundlessly as the Wyoming sky above them.